morning was quiet on the prairie, the kind of silence that stretched wide across the plains, broken only by the faint crow of a rooster and the whisper of wind through dry grass. The cowboy moved with practiced rhythm, his boots crunching softly in the dirt as he circled the barn. He had done this routine countless times, checking the cattle, the feed, the henhouse. But this morning was different. As the door creaked open, he stopped short. There, crouched low among the straw and feathers, was a figure frail, startled, and desperately clutching eggs in her hands. For a long moment, neither moved. The girl's hair was tangled, her dress ragged at the seams, dust clinging to her skin, as if she'd walked for miles. Her chest rose and fell quickly, like a trapped animal waiting for the snare to close. She looked young, but her eyes carried something older: hunger, fear, and a stubborn glimmer that refused to break. The cowboy shifted his weight, his shadow stretching long across the floorboards, falling over her small, trembling form. His hand brushed near his belt, but he didn't draw. Instead, he studied her the way he might study a stray calf, thin and half wild. There was no malice in his gaze, only the measured calm of a man who had spent too many years alone and seen desperation. Before, he had caught men stealing cattle, boys taking apples, drifters trying to snatch gear from his barn. But never a girl, barefoot and starving, reaching for eggs as though they were gold. He let the silence hang heavy, broken only by the faint clucking of hens, still unsettled. The girl's fingers tightened around the eggs, as if he might snatch them away. She glanced once toward the open door, the wide prairie stretching beyond, but her body didn't move. She knew the truth. He was faster, stronger, and the world outside offered no more mercy than the man standing before her. Her lips parted, but no words came. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of both authority and weariness. "Reckon you're hungry," he said. His words weren't sharp, just plain, the way the land itself spoke. Her throat worked as if she might answer, but silence pressed harder than speech. The wind rustled against the barn wall, lifting strands of her tangled hair. She looked small, fragile even, yet there was a defiance in her stare that kept her from looking away. She wasn't begging, she wasn't crying, she simply waited for judgment, as if she had been waiting her whole life. The cowboy crossed his arms, the leather of his vest creaking softly, and tilted his head. In the dim light, filtering through the slats, his face was unreadable. Then his tone shifted, softening like water after stone. "You've got two choices," he said slowly, as if each word carried weight beyond its sound. Her eyes flickered, uncertain, listening. "You can work for your bread," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. Or, he paused, letting the stillness stretch long enough for her heart to pound harder. "Wear white, and stand beside me forever." His words fell heavy, strange, and almost unbelievable. Marriage or labor, forever or survival, two paths laid before a girl with nothing left but eggs in her hands. The meaning struck her like a lash. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not with cruelty, not with pity, but with a plainness that was more dangerous. He offered her a place in his world, a choice that could shape her life from that very moment. She blinked, her lashes wet, her chest tight. She thought of hunger gnawing her bones, of nights under cold skies, of the road that had led her here. She thought of work, endless work, and of the strange idea of standing beside this man in white. The cowboy didn't shift. He wasn't jesting, wasn't trying to frighten her. His eyes were steady, watching how she held the eggs like they might crack with the weight of decision. The barn seemed to close around them, the smell of straw and earth mingling with the tension. He could see the war in her face, the flicker of fear and disbelief, and yet he said nothing more. His kind of men never pleaded. They set terms, clear as the horizon line, and waited for fate or choice to answer them. She lowered her gaze to the eggs, their fragile shells smeared with dirt. They were life, small as they seemed, more precious than gold in her hands. But the offer hung heavier than hunger. A chance to stay, to belong, to tether herself to something steadier than the endless road behind her. She lifted her face again, her lips trembling, though her eyes burned steady. She didn't yet speak, couldn't. The words had tangled themselves deep inside her chest. But the choice, she knew, had already begun to grow roots in her. The cowboy, finally, pushed his hat back, the brim casting his weathered face into clearer light. His jaw was strong, his mouth a thin line that could turn hard or kind, depending on the moment. He wasn't young, not anymore, but he wasn't broken either. He carried himself with the strength of a man who had carved a life out of dust and cattle, and the loneliness of one who had carved it alone. He studied her once more, then gave the faintest nod, as though to say he'd wait for her answer no matter how long. A distant hawk cried across the plains, its call slicing the silence. The hens settled, their feathers rustling as they returned to their nests. Time seemed suspended in that barn, two lives colliding where they never should have met. She clutched the eggs tighter, her heart racing, the cowboy's words echoing like a vow written in dust. Work for bread or wear white forever. Two choices, each as terrifying as they were impossible. And yet, for the first time in her wandering, she felt the ground steady beneath her feet. The moment was no longer escape, it was decision. Lips finally parted, breathless as the words began to form. She didn't yet know what answer she would give, nor if she truly understood the meaning of his offer. But the weight of it, the raw honesty of it, had struck her deeper than hunger. In the shadows of the barn, under the gaze of a cowboy who asked, without demand, she stood caught between survival and something greater, unspoken, and terrifying. The eggs trembled in her hands, fragile as the future that waited for her answer. The cabin walls glowed faintly with the warmth of the fire, shadows flickering across rough-hewn timbers. She sat low to the ground, her knees tucked close, watching the eggs turn golden in the iron pan. The smell of food was almost unbearable after days of emptiness, yet she ate slowly, careful not to appear greedy. Across the room, the cowboy leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, his hat tilted low. He didn't speak, only studied her with the same quiet patience he'd shown that morning. His silence was not unkind, but it carried weight, as though every breath was measured. The crackle of firewood filled the room, joined by the faint whistle of wind sliding through the cracks in the shutters. She forced herself to lift her eyes from the food and glanced toward him. His face, partly hidden in shadow, looked carved by the sun and years of labor. A man who had lived by his hands, who answered to no one but the land. For a moment, she thought he might dismiss her, cast her back into the night once her belly was full. But he stayed, watching her eat. When the last bite was gone, she folded her hands in her lap, her fingers twisting together. Nervously, the fire's glow softened the lines of her face, but her eyes stayed sharp, wary, untrusting. The silence between them grew heavier, as though it demanded to be broken. At last, her voice came, thin at first, but steady enough to hold. "I can work," she said. The words seemed to hang in the smoky air, firm but fragile, like a thread, pulled tight between them. She hadn't chosen the other path, not yet. A faint smile, small as a crack in stone, touched his lips. He lifted his head just enough for the brim of his hat to catch the firelight. "Then work, you shall," he said evenly, his tone more acceptance than challenge. But then his expression shifted, serious once more, and he pushed himself away. From the doorframe, the floorboards groaned under his boots as he stepped closer, the weight of his presence filling the room. His eyes caught hers, steady and unwavering. "But know this," he said, "I don't offer words lightly." Her breath hitched as he stopped just a few feet away, the warmth of the fire catching the edge of his jaw. He seemed larger now, not from height alone, but from the gravity he carried. "Someday," he continued, his voice low and steady, "if you tire of workin', that other choice still stands." He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. He only let the words fall, simple and unadorned, yet carrying the weight of a vow. For her, it was both frightening and strangely grounding, like the first stone laid for a house. She lowered her gaze, her hands clutching the worn fabric of her dress. The words stirred something within her that was more than fear, more than hunger. It was a strange recognition, as though she had been seen, truly seen, for the first time. He wasn't offering pity, he wasn't offering threat. He had placed before her a path, two paths, and left the decision in her hands. That kind of choice was a rare thing in her world, rarer than kindness. The fire popped suddenly, startling her, and she looked up again, her cheeks flushed. The cowboy had turned slightly, his hand brushing along the edge of the table. He reached for a tin cup, poured water from a jug, and set it near her with a simple nod. No flourish, no words, just an action as plain as the man himself. She whispered a soft thank you, though she wasn't sure if he heard. He moved to the chair across from her and finally sat down, stretching his long legs toward the fire. The air between them felt less heavy now, though the unspoken vow still lingered like smoke. Outside, the prairie winds carried their own song, rustling the dry grass and whistling faintly against the eaves. Stars wheeled slowly across the dark sky, unseen but felt, a vast reminder of how small they both were in such a land. Inside the cabin, time seemed slower, gentler, though uncertainty still pulsed like a second heartbeat in her chest. She thought of her words "I can work" and wondered if she had chosen wisely. She thought too of his, that the other choice remained, waiting like an unopened door. The thought made her restless, unable to sit still. Her eyes drifted across the room, taking in the details of his life. The worn saddle propped against the wall, the rifle resting in its rack, the boots by the hearth, the rough blanket folded neatly on a cot. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone, yet lived with order, as though routine was the only company he allowed. She wondered how long he had carried this silence, how many nights he had eaten by this same fire, with only his shadow for company. The thought stirred something in her chest she didn't quite understand. The cowboy's eyes caught hers again, steady as before. For a moment, neither spoke, the fire painting them both in gold and shadow. Finally he said, "Work starts at dawn. Chickens don't wait." His tone carried no jest, only truth. She nodded quickly, grateful for something simple, something ordinary. The task of rising with the sun, tending to hens, lifting feed. These were things she could grasp, solid things that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering. But deep within, the weight of his earlier words pulsed, a truth she could not ignore. The fire burned lower, the night deepened, and still they sat in silence, broken only by the crackling of wood. She drew her shawl tighter, glancing once more at him. He had leaned back now, his hat tipped forward as though he might doze, but she knew he was awake. Men like him did not sleep. Her heart pounded strangely, not with fear, but with the ache of something unspoken, something that bound them in this moment. Fragile as eggshells, yet stronger than the hunger that had driven her here. She felt it waiting, patient. When at last she stretched out on the cot he offered, she turned her face toward the fire. Its glow painted the cabin in warm hues, chasing back the shadows but not the questions that crowded her mind. His words echoed still. If you tire of workin', that other choice still stands. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind outside, the steady rhythm of his boots as he moved across the floor. In the quiet crackle of the fire, an unspoken bond had begun, born, not of eggs or hunger, but of a strange vow, waiting for its time.